This program was made possible by the law firm of Zalman and Schnorman, whose practice is limited to personal injury and insurance law. Welcome to Lawline with your host, Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman is a distinguished trial attorney, author, and lecturer. Each week, Lawline will bring you the most knowledgeable experts in the field of law today. And now, we introduce our guests and our host, Alan Schnorman.
Welcome to Lawline. Today we're going to look at equitable distribution, the method used to divide the assets of a marriage, and see who usually fares better under the system. Our guests are Monica Getz, founder of Coalition for Family Justice, a support group for individuals involved in divorce, and Malcolm Taub, a noted matrimonial attorney. Hello, Malcolm. Hello, Monica. Oh. Monica, tell us about your group, what they do.
We do three things.
Again, that's the Coalition for Family Justice.
The National Coalition for Family.
Okay.
We do supply support, just like you say, but then we do other things. We lobby for changes in laws, and we also accompany people to court and help them in every way we can to see that the lawyers are doing the jobs right.
So like an overseer group.
Sort of. We're holding lawyers' feet to the fire, and we are holding judges' feet to the fire, too.
Okay, now Malcolm's a matrimonial lawyer. How do you feel about matrimonial lawyers?
I think he's a nice man.
Not him, but in general.
Thank you, Monica.
I still think he's a nice man. Matrimonial lawyers, well, it's a mixed bag. I feel, and I think that he will agree with me, they're given so much power over vulnerable people, and there's been not enough oversight, but we did go to Mark Green, in fact, and Mark Green issued the report called Women, Divorce, and Ethics, and I think it blew the lid open. And as you know, some matrimonial lawyers, the head of the Matrimonial Academy, I believe, went to jail. And there are quite a few matrimonial attorneys that should not be practicing.
Now you're saying they're overreaching? How do you feel about that?
I think everything has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. Every day I walk into court and I try to do the best job that I can do to empower my clients, whether they're men or women. I try to follow all ethical standards, and I try to go into court and
yes, but Monica is saying that she feels that they have to literally, her group comes in and make sure that the matrimonial attorney doesn't become a second adversary.
The matrimonial bar has been accused of being a matrimonial cottage industry, and I think that every lawyer in the bar has a responsibility to counter that type of accusation and to operate with the highest standards possible. And there are cases of abuse, and and I think the first thing that we have to do, particularly with someone like Monica sitting here, is to say yes. I'm delighted to see that a lot of the regulations that have been instilled as a result of Monica's effort have helped to counter those abuses, and we can all name them, we all know them. So,
well, let's talk about it. Monica, what has been done to protect the clients more?
Well, thanks to the chief judge here, Judge Judith Kay, we now have 11 new rules.
Let's discuss them.
Yes, I think that's a good idea. The first, and I think the most important thing, it has made it impossible for lawyers to take away their clients' houses, to get confessions of judgment without the permission of the court.
Stop. In other words, they would take it away as a fee, I assume.
Yeah, as a compensation, they would charge and charge and charge, and sometimes not even bill. And at the end of the case, when the so-called equitable distribution would happen, they would present a fee, and they would have their clients during...
So they can't take a mortgage on the house again?
Oh, now they can't.
They cannot.
Without the permission of the judge.
What else has come down? The main parts.
Well, they're obvious things you'd think. They can't sleep with their clients, can you imagine? And the State Bar Association lobbied against these rules, but that's one of the rules, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Also, the clients can be present during conferences. No longer should clients, consumers of the system, be treated like little children.
Present at the conference with the judge
That's
and
right.
the adversary attorney.
That's right, so
Okay.
that they can understand the process. Because many a times, I can give you an example, mostly women, but sometimes men too, would sit in the corridor, the lawyers would be in there alone with the judge, then they would come out and say, the judge will give you next to nothing. This is usually when the fees have tapped the family dry. So you have to settle under these and these conditions. And then they would say, but this is totally unfair. And they would say, okay, put $40,000 for trial right on the table.
I have
And
to
then
tell you, this is not my experience, because I have always
of course,
invited...
you would never do this.
Well, I can only speak from my experience.
I know,
so-
I said he's a nice man.
But the fact is that my clients have attended the court, particularly I've done...
But we're not talking about you.
But I want to make it clear, again, that we're really talking about, if I may, an educational process, which is, and when I said the word empowerment, that's exactly what I meant, which is empowerment is education. Education is empowerment. To let the client know that they have a stake in this litigation, they're an active participant in this litigation, it's their life, they have to know all the facts. Knowing the facts, asking questions, having access to their lawyer. This is one of the most important things that you can teach a client, let a client know that's their role in this litigation. I think you'd agree with
You're
that.
supporting my
What
position.
about legal fees? Are you entitled to a written retainer?
Absolutely, you must. You must now have a written retainer that spells out all the conditions. Plus, there is also the 11 new rules must be clearly understood by the lawyer as well as by
Another
the
major
client.
point, is another major point about the affidavits or something?
That's right.
Could you discuss that?
Well, there is what we were talking about before. It's something that's copied after the idea of the Federal Rule 11, that lawyers are not supposed to contribute to the, what shall we call it, the dishonesty that sometimes...
Perjury?
That's right.
Well, what Monica, I
Let's
think,
discuss that.
is trying to say is that every single document, every pleading, every affidavit must be accompanied by a certification where the client certifies that the facts set forth in the affidavit and in the pleading are true and correct, and the attorney certifies to the veracity of the client.
Let's
There
take
was a
that.
tremendous argument about this.
Let's discuss that. We're talking about equitable distribution. Now, in equitable distribution, both spouses have to submit to the judge, I assume an affidavit as to assets that they have.
Statement of net worth.
Okay, and now you're telling me the lawyer has to certify to that statement as well.
The client certifies to the truth of the statement, that
Right.
the lawyer certifies that he has no knowledge of any untruthful facts contained in the
Malcolm, is
statement.
there
Very important.
any obligation on the part of the attorney to look into this, to see whether or not the client is in fact disclosing all that the client has?
Well, some lawyers are taking the position that they are not, and they are totally independent, and they can rely solely on the client's statements.
And yet certify it.
The answer is no. They feel...
You gotta
they-
let me finish. But what I was going to say is, I think basic rules of ethics, and I think you'd agree with that, of basic practice should require a lawyer not to go into a courtroom and present something that they don't feel is correct and
No,
true.
but do they have an affirmative duty to look in to see whether or not their client is lying?
Not as the rule presently exists.
Unfortunately, it's up to their conscience, and the less conscience they have, the less they feel obligated to go and investigate this.
Well, how do we know that, especially, how do we know that a particular spouse, let's assume they're in a cash business, a husband's in a cash business, and he's working in the business for 30 years, and he has, let's take an example, 6 stores. Well, how does the wife really know what he makes or what he doesn't make?
Well, this is a litigation and an adversarial process, and hopefully the wife will be represented by a reasonable
Of
attorney.
course.
Now, I have clients and who are living like the Sultan of Brunei and claiming that they don't have 2 nickels to rub together. And our process is to get the investigation, to do the due diligence, to show to a court the living standard, and to show that what is represented on the statement of net worth and even sometimes income tax returns are not exactly as represented, and the true facts are quite different.
Monica, how do you feel about equitable distribution versus the states that have equal
I, of course,
distribution?
prefer equal.
Do you
of
mean
course.
community property?
Community property is fine, but at least equal rather than equitable, because just as you brought up, and you seem to be very knowledgeable exactly what goes on in family matters. I'm very impressed at the examples you're bringing. We were talking about it before. Let's take, not to be gender biased in any way, but just say the gentleman who's married for a long time and then he has an affair with his secretary and he knows that he's going to ease out his wife. He will not tell her this. He will then often, not always, but with the help of his attorney, prepare, so to speak, for this announcement and move his assets to the Bahamas and maybe buy a house in his law partner's name. We have a state senator who did this. And when time comes, when the announcement is made to the wife, she's usually the last to know, that there's a divorce coming up, the joint accounts are depleted, and she has not a cent with which to defend herself in this action.
Malcolm, I'd like you to comment on two things. One, Monica's saying that the attorney actually conspires with the client to evade
Sometimes.
this particular sharing of assets. And how does a good attorney find these assets?
Well, I think we're confusing two things. When someone is going to secrete assets, meaning taking assets and hide them from a spouse, that is an attempt to avoid both equitable distribution and any form of equal distribution.
Right.
So we're really talking about very, very base improper behavior here.
But it's not uncommon. You have to
No,
agree with me.
I'm not commenting as to the frequency of it, but I'm saying, of course.
But you
people
didn't
ask-
let me finish. It's not uncommon when someone calls up and says, I am going to have a divorce, the attorney will immediately say, do you have any joint bank accounts? And the attorney, the person who gets to the attorney first, will usually get the advice, empty out the joint bank account, and if he's an honest attorney, he'll say, keep it in an escrow account so that we could share it later. But this is pretty much standard procedure, is it not? And it's a big surprise to the other spouse, whether it's a man or a woman, the account.
Some people may do it, some people don't do it. Where the estate is substantial, and maybe my good fortune is I'm dealing with substantial estates.
Which is another point I'm getting to.
Which cannot be liquidated easily, then really these small accounts are left alone and there's nothing done, and I do not engage in that practice. I know that
We're not talking about you.
I don't feel defensive at all, but I know that sometimes that's done, and again, we have to deal with it.
Isn't there ethical considerations here?
Matrimonial law and matrimonial practice has the word practice in it, and there are practical considerations, and sometimes people are very afraid that we have joint accounts, they're going to be left high and dry, and they may do things which you wouldn't want to appear on the front page of the Times. Now, this is not the advice that I give, but I know that these things do occur, so I don't know what rules we can enact on it, but again, they do occur.
And you remember when Judge Brown was here, the DA, I asked him, would you please prosecute perjury in family matters? And he laughed, because he said he was part of, making the equitable distribution bill, and he knew exactly what I was talking about. Did you realize that perjury is never prosecuted in family matters? And what message does that give when you give a sworn statement under oath, and the judge knows, and the attorney knows, and the attorney maybe even on the other side knows that it's meaningless because perjury and embezzlement is
Is
not...
that true? Perjury in matrimonial matters is never prosecuted, Malcolm?
I would say that in 25 years of practice, I have never heard of perjury being prosecuted in any action where affidavits are given, but that's really not the issue. We're talking about ethics now, and I think maybe what we're trying to do is make the bar responsible to the ethical considerations that you're concerned with.
Yes.
And if we have ethical attorneys and means of dealing with that, hopefully the practice will be more beneficial and equal.
What happens, again, going back to the man who's, let's assume, in business and has a cash business,
Right.
and let's assume the wife knows that although he declares on his income tax returns one number, he really makes multiple times that. And if she brings that up in a court of law, her signing the tax returns year after year She knows that was an offense.
Yes.
How do you overcome
Well,
that?
usually...
It's called an innocent spouse, but they don't have that anymore. I
No,
hear.
they do have it anymore, but there are two issues that we're talking about. Most people do not shoot themselves in the leg. It's not a practice that most people do, and generally speaking, the matrimonial action is kept separate from IRS practice. So what happens is that the spouse will go into court and will present her case and present the standard of living and talk about the vacations they've gone on and present receipts and talk about what the clothing they've bought and try to establish what is actually spent, and the matter will be determined on that basis. So it's not necessarily a mixing of
You mean the
two.
judge doesn't say, I'm taking this record and sending it across the street to the IRS?
A very few do.
Have you had any experience with that?
They never do. They never do. And they certainly never, ever prosecute perjury in any other matter either.
But I have to say this, we're going off into we're going off into a bent which is really, we shouldn't be trying to scorch earth and send our spouse to jail, because that spouse is also the father of our children or the mother of our children.
Who tried to do that?
And what we want to do is, and what I try to do in a matrimony action, is to contain the action, so that by containing the action and dealing with the issues, hopefully in a business-like way, you can also preserve a family, because family law has to do with
And
family.
Monica will respond to that right after this break. You're watching Law Line. I'm Alan Schnorman, your host. Stay with us. Hello, I'm Alan Schnorman. Most of you know me as the host of Law Line, where I interview the most knowledgeable attorneys in the field of law today. So I understand the importance of choosing the right attorney to represent you. With so many law firms to choose from in personal injury law, how do you know who to call? At my firm, Zalman & Schnorman, we fight for the rights of accident victims. If you have been hurt in an accident of any kind, including construction accidents, you may be entitled to a substantial money award for your pain and suffering. Don't try to evaluate your case yourself. Call us at 1-800-LAW-LINE for a free consultation. If you are too injured to come to our office, we will come to you. We get paid only when your case is settled or won. If you have any questions about your accident, call us at 1-800-LAW-LINE. Remember, the insurance companies have lawyers representing them, and so should you. Hello, you're watching Law Line. I'm Alan Schnorman, your host. Today we're talking about equitable distribution and divorce. Who is fairer for the women or for the men? Well, stay tuned and you'll learn. We have Monica Getz from the Coalition for Family Justice and Malcolm Taub, a noted matrimonial attorney. Monica, what do you think? Are the courts more for the men, for the women? What do you think?
I think that the courts are a little bit out of touch with what's going on in families. And there is an enormous power bias, which includes gender bias. I think it's very hard to be in the courts if you don't have the money to pay for an attorney. I think
But isn't that a general thing?
that's a very general
Don't
thing.
we all suffer from that?
No,
Yeah.
not you, because you, as you told us before, you get the wealthy clients.
But I have other clients too who have problems coming into court, and there's always and it's male clients.
He asked me a question, I'm answering it.
And
The
women clients as well?
The feminization of poverty has been directly attributed to divorce. There are 1/3, I saw this last night on a television show that I will not name, 1/3 of fathers do not see their children, abandon their children. Half of that 1/3 in this country is not supporting their are not supporting their children. There's $14 billion in child support that's not being paid. This is mostly so that'll give you a flavor.
Is it because the laws in our country are not sufficient, or is it that the judges are not enforcing the laws that are now on the books?
Both. But I will tell you this, the system that we now have, I don't believe it intentionally was planned to work this way. It has evolved because attorneys and judges have made the decision on how to improve. It has evolved. Not until now.
Attorneys and judges have made what decisions?
Decisions on how to improve the system. If you look at the committees to do court reform, they consist of solely attorneys and judges. Litigants, the consumers of the system, the people who have to live with the consequences of what goes on, have not been listened to.
Malcolm?
Well, I believe that the system has evolved as a result of not only the lawyers and judges, but there are hearings on this, there are reports, as you mentioned, the Green Report coming in, and there are input on each and every level of the courts
It's beginning.
Well,
but this is why we're in
my
trouble.
experience has been, when we started talking about equitable distribution, that created the law before it, as you know, was totally a gender-biased law. Most people forget that before 1981, only men could pay alimony.
Monica is making the point that even under the existing system,
Right.
as better as it is as the old system, let's not go back, let's move forward. And she's saying that women are still not on an equal basis in the court of law because of the judges and the lawyers.
She's saying something different. She's saying that money talks. In other
I'm
words,
saying both
I
things.
think what you're saying is that what you were talking about is the attempt to introduce into legislation a provision in New York law requiring judges to provide counsel fees for the non-moneyed spouse. Now that may be a very positive addition, as opposed to leaving it to the discretion of the judges.
Malcolm, give us an idea. Let's assume people are watching, and let's assume that they want to know their rights. They want to know if I'm in a marriage, a long-term marriage, and I got 3 kids at home, and my husband may very well be leaving me, or I think he's leaving me, or we're not getting along, or I want to leave him. What are my rights? What can I count on? The man makes $75,000 a year. I'm home with the kids. One, I have no money for lawyer fees. Who pays the lawyer?
Well, again, we're talking about generally speaking, the moneyed spouse should pay the lawyer.
It doesn't. And I'm sorry.
It's very interesting
The way it is
because I
today.
have female women clients who have gotten their fees paid
He's
quite
asking about
adequately.
rights. By legal rights, she's not entitled unless
We
she's
are-
so
we
poor
are talking about
that
is- no, we
the
are
court
talking-
will assign an attorney. But in matrimonials, that doesn't apply. It applies in criminal court.
It's an interesting thing. Most matrimonials begin with what is called an omnibus motion, which includes an application for legal fees. And my experience
You
is
have a right to make any application, but if the judge does not award it until the end of the case, you are finished.
Monica, we know, and I know, and you know, that in most cases where there is an application for interim fees, the court will award it. And there
Maybe
would
because of our work
and there
lately.
Congratulations.
Do you
for the-
require, Malcolm, do you require your clients to come up with money if they don't have it?
Every
Or will you
case-
wait till the motion?
Every case, every case is evaluated differently. Obviously, we need
Do you take a case
fees.
without a retainer?
I have, yes.
But that's very
Yes, but- and there
unusual.
has to be.
Okay, let's go back to the example, if I may. He makes $75,000 a year. What am I going to get for the kids? What am I going to get for myself? What am I going to get? He's a lawyer. Do I get part of his practice?
Well, the first question is, what is
The answer is it's up to the judge.
Well,
What does the law say?
the law is, first of all, for children, we know that there is a support guideline which goes for
That's
the
right.
kids. And for 2 kids, you would get 25% of his gross salary minus some deduction. So that has been
25% of his gross salary.
minus certain deductions.
FICA, minus FICA.
And what about for myself?
Okay, now, the law is that there is maintenance based upon the need of the spouse. Now, maintenance is not alimony, and you know that too. We have moved from an alimony system as existed before 1981 to an asset-based system as exists now, which is what equitable distribution is about. The idea was to divide the assets of a marriage regardless of title
Now,
ownership.
you said 2 children. What if I have 1 child?
17%.
And if I have 3 children?
It goes up accordingly in a different percentage.
But You have to prove that income. If there's a cash business, you're going to have an enormously hard time. And then there has to be something called discovery, which enriches both sides of the both attorneys if they have money enormously. If they don't have money, there is no discovery, which is a tremendous disadvantage for the non-moneyed spouse, which is most often the wife.
My viewers are always concerned with money, and they're always concerned with legal fees. How much does a matrimonial lawyer cost?
I'd love for him to answer this.
Generally speaking, a lawyer operates on an hourly basis. And
What does a divorce cost if it's litigated, a contested divorce, in your office?
in my office,
Yes.
that's almost
A custody matter?
Arranged.
Custody
Not a
matter.
custody matter.
I will give you examples.
Yeah.
I will give you
Please.
examples because custody is probably, and that is probably one of the most serious matters that you will get. I have seen custody matters ranging, unfortunately, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
That's right.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Well, what if my husband doesn't have that money and I don't have the money, yet we're fighting over custody?
We have a major problem.
That's right.
And
this is our problem.
And this is probably one of the, and I'll agree with you, one of the major problems of the system, because we're talking about lives. We're talking about lives.
What
of people.
The average person, I'm sorry, you asked me to jump in, so I jump in. The average person cannot afford divorce. And absolutely not afford.
What does a divorce cost when you don't have a custody issue, when you're just talking about support for yourself and support for the children?
Well, then you're talking about a totally wide range of activities,
contested.
depending on contested
Yeah,
marriage can
contested.
be between, on a major case,
Yes.
can run $25,000 a month.
A month?
A month in fees.
Well, some divorces go on for many months, and if not more than a year. Is that correct?
Many years, this is the
You
truth.
can multiply the numbers.
So how does a middle-income family
They can't.
get justice?
A middle-income family, like everything else, there are alternatives. But let me say this: there are a middle-income family, and those of us who have been through a divorce, so I can speak from personal experience. Every divorce does not have to be an insane experience. People can, believe it or not, people can sit down and deal with this rationally, particularly if they have children and care
particularly-
about.
Do you find that sometimes spouses bring the issue of custody in, but what they're really talking about is financial?
Child
That
support.
they bring in the issue of custody,
Well,
but they're just using it as a leverage?
Sometimes.
Those of us who have been in the practice know that unfortunately children have been used as tools for financial gain. 2 years ago or 3 years ago, we had a rash of sexual abuse matters. No one takes that type of allegation lightly. And yet, when something comes up repeatedly, time and time again.
Monica, let me ask you some personal
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
Now, I know you were married to Stan Getz, a
Right.
very famous musician,
Right.
for over 32 years. I
That's right.
assume you had lived at a high level of income.
That's
Mr. Getz
right.
was world-renowned.
That's right.
I mean, how do you relate this as far as attorneys and attorneys' fees? I mean, you've been through it.
It was mind-blowing. It seemed that the system was totally out of touch with reality. It was protracted as long as it could be protracted. Perjury was not prosecuted. The judge went against the law. It was just a
And
mind-blowing experience.
your relationship with your lawyer, was it a good relationship, poor?
I had eventually the finest Whitney North Seymour.
Quickly, what's your advice to somebody there who's looking for a lawyer? What do you look for in a matrimonial lawyer? Quickly?
Okay, honesty, caring, and accountability.
How do you know all those things?
We do in the coalition because we get.
And how do I contact your group?
914-591-5753.
Malcolm Taub, thank you very much for appearing on Lawline. Monica
you, Al.
Getz, thank you
Thank you so
for
much.
coming down to
That was
Lawline.
fun. That was fun.
And as always, this is Alan Schnorman. Thank you for watching Lawline.
You have been watching Lawline with your host, New York trial attorney Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman will be back with you next week at the same time. If you have any questions about this week's program, please write to Lawline, 63 Wall Street, New York, New York, 10005, or call area code 212-432-9111. This program was made possible by the law firm of Zalman and Schnorman, whose practice is limited to personal injury and insurance law.